Let's get to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Bucs offseason in 60 seconds. Brought back Baker Mayfield, 3-year, $100 million deal with 50 guaranteed. Signed Mike Evans to a 2-year extension. Tagged and then extended Antoine Winfield, 4 years, $80 million with $45 million guaranteed. Good Lord. Brought back Jordan Whitehead on a 2-year deal. Brought back Lavonte David. The story is they brought the band back together. This offseason is what the Bucs did. They did trade Carlton Davis and let Devin White and Shaq Barrett walk in free agency. Lost offensive coordinator Dave Canales to the Panthers. Replaced him with Liam Cohen. They also have a new offensive line coach, pass game coordinator, a lot of staff turnover on offense. Drafted Duke offensive lineman Graham Barton in the first round. Moved him to center, which I'm very excited about. Pass rusher Chris Braswell in the second round from Alabama. And Tyke Smith, their theoretical nickel, and Jalen McMillan, who was excellent at Washington last year, receiver in the third round. Anything else about the Bucs that you thought was notable?
It's just a funny team to bring the band back together for. That's really my only take on it.
Blue chip check-in for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. What do you got?
Tristan Wirfs, easy. Antoine Winfield, easy. Mike Evans is maybe closer to the line. He's just the most steady Eddie player in
I'm
history.
giving it to him.
Yeah, I'll give it to him. Like,
just out of pure respect, I'm just giving the salute to Mike Evans. He deserves inclusion.
I think he's only like 2 or 3 years away from the most 1,000-yard seasons in a row. So, I mean, pretty hard to not give it to him there.
And it's not even just out of respect. He was really good last year. From a separation standpoint, I thought he was doing some really impressive stuff considering how we think about Mike Evans and considering where he is at this stage in his career. We'll get to some of that as we talk about the offense, but I'm still giving it to him. I think Mike Evans is still an awesome player at this stage. Chris Godwin is still good. You know, there'll always be a place in my heart for Lavonte David. I think Vita Vea has taken kind of a step down from here. So I think it's Wirfs, Winfield, and Evans, and I'm fine leaving everyone else out for now.
Yeah.
What significant question marks do you have about this depth chart as the season gets going?
I still kind of want to see what's going on at guard. I think bringing in Barton at center was good, but I still want to see what's going on there. The cornerback room is, I think when you lose a player like Carlton Davis, even if a lot of these other guys have played before, I'm still a little bit curious to see how this is going to roll out. I think those are the two big ones for me.
All right. What are you watching in the first month of the season with the 2024 Bucs?
I mean, we just kind of mentioned it, but like, is this defensive back room going to be okay? Because, obviously you lose a guy like Carlton Davis. Again, we've brought him up on every show somehow, it seems like, but just a great player. And so to lose him, I think really hurts. They're going to have Jamel Dean coming back from like 8 different injuries last year. So we'll see if he can be healthy. When he's healthy, he's a good player, but it is a little tough that he's basically stepping in from, going from number 2 to number 1. That can always be tough. And some guys can't always handle that transition. Like you said, they're going to be starting Zion McCollum from day one, which is not something I love. He's kind of like a watered down version of Tariq Woolen, where he's very good size, very good straight line speed. Everything else, it can be a little bit of a roller coaster. And then the nickel spot, Christian Izien played relatively well for them last year as a guy who I think was an undrafted free agent, but he was playing safety in their preseason game. And like you said, Tyke Smith is probably going to play nickel. Maybe he's decent, but when you're throwing in a rookie nickel into a cornerback room that is not all that established at this point, maybe a little bit scary. And then even the other safety spot outside of Antoine Winfield, I don't think Whitehead played all that good last year with the Jets. So I'm a little bit curious about how well this reunion is going to go in Tampa.
While we're on the back seven, how do you think Lavonte David, what do you think he still has left in the tank? I'm going to the man who watches linebackers like he's getting paid for it.
I mean, I think he doesn't have quite the same range, like getting outside the numbers that he used to have, but his trigger is still so good that if you are playing within the numbers, any run between the box, he still triggers and gets downhill so fast. He's able to beat offensive linemen to the spot consistently. He's never been the biggest take on blocks guy. So I'm not really going to knock him for that because it's just never been his game. So I think you don't have quite the same range that he used to have outside the numbers or maybe even in coverage a bit. But I think because he's still such a cerebral player, he's still firmly an above average to good linebacker, just maybe not like the Pro Bowl caliber guy he used to be.
You think about ceiling for this defense. Where do you see it overall?
It's hard for me to even see like top half, honestly, because I just don't see very many star players on this defense. And then I think there's a question mark
fair. Outside of Winfield, I think that's very fair.
Exactly. It's like Winfield's the guy. And then other than that, I think there's question marks at literally every level of the defense. I mean, I just unraveled the entire secondary room. the linebacker spot next to Levante David. I think, KJ Britt played okay last year, but I don't know if he's fantastic. And then, like you mentioned, and we'll talk about the rest of the front, I don't think it's that complete yet. So I'm not too bullish here.
My biggest question about the Bucs: what does the offense look like, and can they fix the running game? Liam Cohen comes in as the offensive coordinator, and they did some good stuff under Dave Canellis last year. I mean, obviously, we'll talk about Baker, but they resurrected his career, but they were still dead last in rushing success rate. And the gap between them and the Jets at 31 was bigger than the gap between the Jets and the Titans at 22nd. Like, that's how bad the Bucs running game was down last year. And I wonder what they're going to do to fix that. Obviously, bringing in Graham Barton is like step one. Personnel was an issue last season. So you go get a tackle and you put him at center. And I know it's preseason. He looked phenomenal. Like, he looked so good against the Bengals last weekend. And just having that size and physicality in the middle, like, that's exciting. Cody Mauch is their right guard. They drafted him in the second round last year. He was I would say D1 AA. I have no idea what it's actually called anymore. He was at North Dakota State as their left tackle. Did not have the bulk to be a day one starter at guard, probably, but he has put on a decent amount of weight apparently in the offseason. Their interior as a whole looked decent in that game against the Bengals. So personnel should be an upgrade. The other problem, though, when you watch that running game last year, it was one of the most static running games in the NFL. There was a lot of mid-zone, inside zone, and no motion whatsoever. Rachaad White last year was second in the NFL in carries without any sort of motion. Among running backs with at least 20 total carries, period, only Javonte Williams lost more EPA on those plays. And only Derrick Henry had more zone runs last year. White was 53rd among 62 guys in EPA gained on those runs. So you had a static running game with bad personnel, and the results were disastrous. So what does it look like this year? You have Cohen coming sort of over from LA. Like, he came from Kentucky, but he spent time in LA. Their offensive line coach, Kevin Carberry, was with the Rams. He's a duo guy, like going back to his days at Stanford. So I assume there'll be more downhill runs because they have the personnel to do it. How does it all mix together with what they were doing last year? I have a good sense that they're going to use Tristan Wirfs in ways he's never been used in the run game. I mean, you have a guy like that, I think you'd be doing yourself a disservice if you weren't watching a little Lions and Niners film trying to figure out how you can weaponize him in the run game. So I do think that there are going to be some intriguing answers to how they're going to fix that this year. And I think that it is going to allow that side of the ball to come together in a way that it really just couldn't, even when Canales is doing a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, I'm kind of two minds on this. I think what you mentioned in terms of the offensive staff maybe being a little bit better fit to be more varied, more put together in the run game. I think that's spot on. Like, this is a just offensive infrastructure that Liam Cohen is coming from, where being able to run the ball and being able to run the ball well with really good detail is kind of the basis of the entire thing. So I think that's definitely going to be good. You mentioned the personnel. I think getting Barton obviously goes a long way. If Mock can look better and stronger, I think that also goes a long way. I'm curious about the motion stuff though, because I wonder how much of them not doing it last year was a Baker thing. And obviously he's still going to be back, so I just don't know if they're going to add that much to the offense. So that is less to me they can't do it, and more just like I want to see if that part of the offense is going to change or not.
So I was going to ask you this because when they were with Baker last year, it was a lot of empty, it was a lot of spread looks where he was getting to play point guard a little bit. My sense is that is not going to be the foundation of what this passing game looks like. I think there's going to be a lot of play action that plays off some of the runs that we're talking about. And again, motion becomes a big part of that. So if you're not going to be in some of those static spread out looks, I assume that motion is going to be a heavier piece of your offense overall. If you had Baker Mayfield as your quarterback, what would the construction of the passing game look like for you?
I mean, it's the easy answer, but I think it's actually just what they did last year, where you let him throw it down the field and you lean into being. I think no matter what, Baker Mayfield is not going to be a consistent high success rate quarterback for you. Even if you have the perfect offensive construction for him, that's just not the type of player that he is. I think he's a little bit too, even though he's better in the pocket now, I think he's still a little bit too frantic at times. His accuracy is not great. You kind of just got to lean into the explosive plays. And I think that is the thing that Canales did really well last year is, do you know Baker threw more 16 plus yard passes than anybody in the NFL last year? That's what you should be doing with Baker. Just let him rip it, bro. Like, when you have Mike Evans, you have Chris Godwin who can win down the field. Now they have Jalen McMillan. Yeah, man, just let him sling it a little bit.
Do you is that okay if it's off play action in your mind? Because I do think that's how they're going to hunt that stuff out.
I think as long as you get there, that's
Okay.
completely fine with me. And if you can make the run game actually useful and be kind of your, success rate part of the offense, for lack of a better word, I think this could be a perfectly fine construction. I just think the passing offense, you got to just lean into the explosives and pray to God you can get enough of them.
I wonder what the wide receiver usage is going to look like. Yeah, with I think McMillan is going to get a real crack to be that third receiver. Him and Trey Palmer, kind of like Trey Palmer or Trey Tucker. I have no idea which one it is. There's one with the Raiders and there's one with the
Palmer is
Bucks. And
Tampa. Yeah.
I've chosen not to learn which is which. I think that those guys will probably switch off based on what you need. Obviously, Palmer's more of a vertical threat. McMillan was a slot guy for the most part in Washington. Godwin's going to be their primary slot receiver, but with how many condensed formations this team uses, it really ceases to matter at a certain point. Like McMillan's still going to get to operate with a lot of that space. But the thing I'm really excited about is in breakers for Mike Evans. Like in this offense, him just running big digs with that massive frame and Baker just ripping those things. I think that's going to be fun. And talking to people there, Evans is like, I can do that stuff. Even if they haven't asked me to do it, I can and I'm willing to do it. So that being a part of his game where I think that his separation skills at this stage of his career are actually a little bit underrated because of how we paint him. I do think that there's a chance that this trio of receivers with McMillan being the third guy can come together in a pretty fun way.
And I actually think McMillan is perfect. When I wrote his draft profile for Bleacher Report, obviously, like you said, he was mostly slot at Washington. I think that was just because they had Rome Odunze and Jalen Polk. I thought he actually looked good when he had to play outside, and I kind of want to see him do it more here. So I'm excited for that for sure.
What's keeping you up at night with this year's Bucks?
This running back situation is bad, and obviously you
We
just laid
didn't
out a
mention that when we were talking about the run game.
yeah, you obviously you laid out a bunch of the stats for Rashad White, and a lot of that was the offensive construction and the offensive line. But he is also just not a consistent runner. His vision is kind of all over the place. He's a guy who has a tendency to run into his own linemen, that sort of stuff. I don't think he's as consistent as you want a lead back to be, and so in terms of consistency, he to me is not a lead type of back. Obviously, I think he was like third or fourth in terms of carries last year. So physically, he is a that type of back, but I just don't think getting that level of production, he is that type of player. And then Bucky Irving, really cool passing game player. I think he's a great receiver, really quick with the ball in his hands, really good in space. He's also not a workhorse type of back. So I just kind of worry about, and even his vision, he's also kind of like Rashad White, not a very consistent runner. So I'm just worried a little bit about how consistent they're going to get this run game with this running back room.
Yeah, that is the one piece of this that I feel like they didn't really do a lot to change. I mean, obviously they brought in Bucky Irving, but it still feels like Rashad White is going to get a lot of work within this offense, and how culpable he is and what the running game looked like last year. I think we're going to find out this year with all the other systemic changes that we're talking about. We talked about the second and third cornerback spots. We talked about that a bit. The other one I wanted to hit here: how real was the Baker sense? Like, is this real? Because the development plan that he's on, or just the timeline that he's on, it's like the Geno thing, right? So Geno comes in, paltry contract, gets a chance to be the starter, salvage his career, gets a quarterback contract that is kind of unlike any other in the league. And Baker got essentially a markup on the Geno Smith contract, is where they landed. The Geno thing is real. Like, he played extremely well after that first season, and I think that it has given the Seahawks a real shot with this current makeup and this construction of the roster to be competitive with him in that building. Is the same thing going to happen with Baker? Like you mentioned, some of those things about his skittishness in the pocket. He wasn't taking sacks at the rate that he had been previously. Does he slide back a little bit in a different offensive system with a different play caller in a way that Geno didn't? I don't know where I land on this. Like, I don't know how confident I am that he can keep going on this trajectory, but it's at least in the back of my mind that this guy that they committed to, not in a huge way, but in a way similar to what the Seahawks did with Geno Smith, a guy that they committed to, is he's still going to be a plus for them the way that he was last year. And we won't know that until the games get started.
Yeah, I'm probably a little bit more scared about it because I looked this up. I think he was 13th in EPA per dropback last year. Do you think he does that again?
That's kind of what I mean. Where
I,
and they ran super hot on third down last year. That's part of the issue, is that it really does feel like he blacked out for like 17
yes.
games and we got the best possible version of him. And I just don't know what we can reasonably expect this year after that.
That's a good way to put it. That's a good way to put it.
What are you most excited about for the 2024 Bucks?
We talked about him a little bit, but Jalen McMillan, actually, this was a player I really liked in the draft process. I think I had a top 50 grade on him. I just think his route running, his hands, he's just very much. Again, I've said this before on other shows. When you chart quarterbacks for years, you start to really appreciate the receivers who are just in the right place at the right time and catch the ball. Jalen McMillan is absolutely that type of dude, and he'll go
They had a
down and
lot
he'll
of those
throw.
guys.
Yes, yes. And he'll go block. Like I said earlier too, I think he mostly played in the slot at Washington, but I think he can actually be pretty good outside. So I'm really excited for how much run he actually gets because obviously they have two really good receivers already, but I think he could really be a nice third piece for them.
I'm most excited about the offensive line after that Bengals showing. Like, I'm actually looking forward to what this group looks like. I think that Graham Barton, the idea of moving him to center is genuinely exciting. So, what this run game looks like and just what role that offensive line has in kind of this new phase of this offense overall, I'm looking forward to watching that. Tristan Wirfs is an absolute monster. Luka Decky was so much better in year 2. And we'll see what we get from Cody Mock heading into this season. We won't talk about the left guard spot, but I do think that 4 of the other spots along this offensive line have a chance to be pretty good by the end of the year, and we'll see what that actually means for this team. Most important supporting character for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this season.
I mean, you just brought up the interior, but I think it's kind of Graham Barton. Like, I think the stars in this offense are Tristan Wirfs, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. I think they need somebody up front other than Tristan Wirfs to give him a little help because I think you mentioned I think they understand that Tristan Wirfs could be a superstar weapon for them, but you still need some other offensive line piece that's going to give you something. And I think if Barton can be that, that goes a really long way for this offense.
Mine is the second year guys up front. What do they get from Cansey? What do they get from Diaby? Like we mentioned, they don't have a lot of stars on that side. And if those guys take a big step forward and they can give some juice to that pass rush, this team was 27th in the NFL last year in pressure rate when they didn't blitz. That was 28th. That was right behind the Falcons. They were worse than the Falcons. So if you're not going to be able to heat up the quarterback without sending extra bodies, and I know that's a huge part of what they do, but you're still only blitzing 40% of the time. When you rush 4, if you're just sitting dead, that becomes a huge problem. And so if they can consistently be creating pressure and havoc with a 4-man rush with some of those younger guys, if they take a step forward, I think that's going to be a really important piece for this defense. What counts as a successful season for the 2024 Bucks in your mind?
I think if they can get Baker to again, be worth the contract and him to play at a I mean, I mentioned what he was 13th in EPA per dropback. If he can at least be top half again, I think that is kind of a win for them if he can sustain that level of production and then just make the playoffs. Like I think this is going to be a little bit of a tougher division than it was last year. So if they can just make the playoffs, get into the wild card, prove that this isn't a complete, they're going to fall off the cliff type of team, I think that's a win.
Mine is adjacent to that. I think a lot of that is where I was landing too. But for me, it's can you justify bringing the band back together? Like, can you justify that this core and these pieces, this was the right move because there is enough juice within this roster for over the next year or so with one more offseason, you can get to a place where you're competitive because that has to happen. Like they've committed themselves to this core for the most part in the way that they've spent money. So you need to show me that this core was worth committing to. You're not just a 9-win team of a shitty division. Like you actually are 1 or 2 steps away from being a real contender in the NFC. And I think that this season, that's what we're going to hopefully find out. Your irresponsible player prediction for the Bucks.
So we are recording this on August 15th. We talked about the running backs a little bit. My irresponsible prediction is that one of their top 2 backs is not on the roster right now. He is somewhere on a different team. He's on the couch. I don't know where he's at, but he's not on the roster.
I I don't think you're wrong about that. I feel like that could be coming. I'm telling
Latavius
you,
Murray
man.
might do it for the 10th year in a row. I don't know.
Khalil Herbert, just call. Just give us a call. He's around. I don't understand why somebody hasn't traded for him at this point, considering the Bears have Roshan Johnson and DeAndre Swift and committed to him, and Khalil Herbert's in the final year of his deal. If I was a team that needed running back help, I would be calling them every 20 minutes, seeing if that guy was available. All he does is have efficient runs over the course of entire seasons.
He has better vision than Rashad White and Bucky Irving.
irresponsible player prediction for me. Graham Barton goes to the Pro Bowl. Like I'm all in. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm 100% in on this.